Scooter is a slave master. He's got 12 masters, and they're telling you what to play, what to do. The audio distorts, slows down, as if the tape itself is breaking. A single hot tear hits the floor. The sound is a gunshot in the quiet. We see it, a close-up, a single drop of moisture on dark, polished concrete. It shimmers under the harsh, clinical light of a television studio. This is not a performance. This is a collapse. Los Angeles night. The city of angels. A sprawling grid of light. A circuit board of ambition and secrets. The hum is constant. A low-frequency drone of traffic, commerce, and countless dreams being bought and sold. Our story begins not in a recording studio, but in a boardroom. The air is cold, sterilized by air conditioning. The scent of expensive coffee and anxiety. The only sound is the soft click of a titanium watch against a polished mahogany table. This is the music industry, a machine worth billions. It runs on a certain kind of order. A predictable rhythm of album cycles, marketing pushes, and carefully crafted personas. It is an ecosystem that thrives on control. And in 2016, one man was becoming profoundly, dangerously uncontrollable. Kanye West, a prodigy, a visionary who redefined the sound of a generation. From the soulful beats of the college dropout to the auto-tuned heartbreak of 808s and heartbreak, he was a constant, volatile force of innovation. He wasn't just a musician. He was a culture-shaping event. But the higher you climb, the more the air thins. The pressure changes. The first crack appeared not in a tabloid, but in a hospital. November 2016. Kanye West is admitted for what his representatives call exhaustion, a polite corporate term. The public imagines a tired artist resting. The reality was far more severe. A source close to the situation described the scene. The smell of antiseptic, the beep of a heart monitor, the palpable fear. This wasn't just burnout. It was a psychiatric crisis. A breaking point. He was canceled from the remainder of his Saint Pablo Tour. The massive, floating stage, a technological marvel meant to bring him closer to his fans, was docked. The lights went out. The official narrative was clear. A talented but troubled man, buckling under the spotlight. The pressures of fame, the recent death of his mother, the relentless pace. A tragic but ultimately personal story. But if you listen closely to the words he began to speak upon his return, a different pattern emerges. A more unsettling picture begins to develop. He started talking about boxes, traps. He said he felt like a robot. He claimed he was being used as a pawn. The media dismissed it as the ramblings of a mentally unwell man. The industry shook its head in pity. The machine labeled him unreliable. But what if he wasn't just raving? What if, in his fractured state, he was seeing the wiring behind the walls? What if Kanye West's very public breakdown was not the result of a system failing him, but the result of a system working as intended? To understand, we must rewind the tape. Back before the stadiums, before the Grammys, before the fame. A young Kanye West in Chicago, a boy with a ferocious belief in his own talent, fighting to be heard. The music industry was a fortress, and he was determined to knock down its gates. He wasn't from the streets that bred most hip-hop stars. He was middle-class, artistic, different. He didn't fit the mold. And so, for years, he was told no. He was a producer, not a rapper. He was a beat maker, not a frontman. He was, in essence, being controlled by a system that decided what was marketable. His eventual success was a testament to his sheer, undeniable force of will. He broke the mold, but in doing so, he entered a much larger, more sophisticated machine. One that doesn't just control who gets in, but what they do once they're inside. This machine has a currency. It isn't money. Money is just a byproduct. The true currency is intellectual property. The ownership of ideas, of songs, of masters, the very soul of an artist's work. In 2020, a war erupted in the industry. A quiet, brutal war over this very currency. Taylor Swift very publicly fought to regain control of her life's work, her early recordings. It was a battle that laid bare the mechanics of power in the music business. The masters weren't just assets, they were leverage. They were control. Kanye West watched this. He commented on it. He was deeply, personally entangled in it. He understood the stakes. Because for an artist like Kanye, whose identity is so completely fused with his creations, the idea of not owning them is a form of psychological violence. It is the ultimate loss of control. And so, as he began to spiral, his rants kept circling back to this one central point. They got you, they got you, they got you. He'd repeat, his eyes wide with a terrifying clarity. He wasn't just talking about the media. He was talking about contracts, about deals, about the very structure of the industry that had built him. He started to say the quiet part out loud. He talked about his own masters. He claimed he was in a prison of his own mind, but also, perhaps, a prison of his own contracts. The man who had spent his entire life fighting for creative control was realizing that at the highest level, that control is an illusion carefully maintained by those who hold the deeds to your art. The breakdown, then, can be seen not as a malfunction, but as a logical, terrifying reaction to a horrifying discovery. The discovery that you are not the master of your own destiny, that you are, in the end, an asset. And when an asset becomes volatile, when it threatens the stability of the machine has protocols. The Saint Pablo Tour was meant to be a triumph, a révolutionnaire arénaissage d'installation. But the atmosphere inside those venues was changing. It was electric, but with a dangerous current. Fans began to describe a strange sensation. The music was the same, the performances were powerful, but something was off. Kanye would stop mid-song. He would deliver long, impassioned monologues that felt less like raps and more like confessions from the edge of a cliff. The air smelled of sweat and confusion. The bass vibrated not just through the floor, but deep in your chest, a physical manifestation of his unraveling. Then, on November 21st, 2016, in Sacramento, the dam broke. The stage, his floating island, became a pulpit for a sermon the world wasn't ready to hear. He ran it about Facebook, Google, and Jay-Z. His words were a torrent, a chaotic data dump of perceived betrayals and industry conspiracies. The performance lasted just 3 songs. He walked off. The house lights came up, harsh and unforgiving, on tens of thousands of bewildered faces. The scent of disappointment was acrid. The machine swung into action. Headlines blared. Kanye West suffers psychotic breakdown. The narrative was set in stone within hours. He was exhausted. He was troubled. He needed help. It was a medical issue, a personal tragedy. The language was carefully chosen to elicit pity and, more importantly, to dismiss the content of his words. But what he was saying was irrelevant. Only the how mattered. He was hospitalized. He was sedated. He was, for a time, silenced. But when he reemerged, the man was different. The old Kanye, the charismatic, arrogant genius, was gone. In his place was a prophet of a new, unsettling gospel. He began appearing on TMZ, of all places. In a newsroom, under blinding lights, he would speak his truth. And it was there he dropped the bombshell that still echoes through the halls of the industry. Kanye, on TMZ, when you hear about slavery for 400 years, that sounds like a choice. The outrage was immediate, universal. He was called ignorant, insane, a traitor to his race. But what if that statement, stripped of its inflammatory delivery, was a distorted reflection of his own reality? What if he wasn't talking about 18th century plantations, but about 21st century contracts? About the choice to remain enslaved to a system that owns your labor, your art, your very identity? He was trying to articulate the concept of a gilded cage, that the most insidious form of control isn't the chain that binds you, but the golden handcuff that makes you complicit in your own imprisonment. He felt that the industry, the media, the corporate powers, they were all modern slave masters, and he was the asset they were trying to break. His public support for Donald Trump was the next, and perhaps most calculated, piece of this rebellion. It was social suicide. It alienated his fan base, enraged the media, and baffled his peers. But from a certain angle, it was a stroke of strategic genius. By aligning with the ultimate cultural antagonist, he was making himself untouchable to the liberal-leaning entertainment establishment. He was burning the very bridges the system used to control him. He was declaring himself an independent state. And then the ultimate act of defiance, Yeezy. While the music industry watched in horror, Kanye was building his own empire. Yeezy wasn't just a sneaker. It was a declaration of independence. It was a tangible, billion-dollar proof that he didn't need the machine. The smell of new rubber and raw canvas in his Calabasas design studio was the smell of freedom. The sound was no longer a cheering crowd, but the quiet, powerful hum of a self-sustaining enterprise. The machine, however, does not relinquish its assets easily. In 2020, as he launched his presidential campaign, the counteroffensive began. A series of devastating, coordinated media attacks, leaked stories, former associates turning on him. The narrative of the unhinged madman was amplified to a deafening roar. His rallies were depicted as chaotic meltdowns. His every word was dissected for signs of instability. It was a character assassination on a global scale. The goal was clear: to discredit him so thoroughly that his words, his accusations against the industry, would be permanently dismissed as the ravings of a lunatic. The most potent weapon was wielded against his personal life. His divorce from Kim Kardashian played out on the world stage, a brutal, public disassembling of a man. The intimate details of his mental health, his parenting, his every failure were served up as daily entertainment. The message was being seared into the public consciousness. This man is broken. He cannot control himself, let alone his own destiny. But through the fire, a pattern emerges, a chilling consistency to his claims. He spoke of being blackballed, of secret committees deciding his fate. He claimed his phone was tapped, his movements tracked. He said he was the most watched, most listened to, most followed human being on the planet. The media laughed. But is it so far-fetched? For a billionaire artist waging war on the establishment, a man with a direct line to tens of millions of followers, is surveillance really a conspiracy theory? Or is it just standard corporate and media practice? He was no longer just a musician having a breakdown. He was a dissident being neutralized. The war for Kanye West's mind was also a war for his legacy, and the battlefield was his own art. In the summer of 2022, the release of his album Donda 2 was not a traditional launch. There was no Spotify, no Apple Music. It was exclusive to the stem player, a curious, palm-sized device he himself had championed. The move was hailed as revolutionary, a middle finger to the streaming giants. But it was also an act of desperation. A lifeboat after the industry had scuttled his ship. The air around this project was different. No longer the sterile, perfumed air of a label's listening party, but the charged atmosphere of a tech demo in a sparse warehouse. The sound of the music was often raw, unfinished, littered with jarring, almost prophetic voice notes. It felt less like an album and more like an audio diary from a bunker. He was building his own systems, creating his own distribution, trying to code his way out of the prison. But the walls were closing in. The final and most devastating blow came from the corporate world. One by one, the pillars of his empire began to crack. A tweet, a rant, an interview. Each new controversy acted like a sledgehammer swung by his own hand. Adidas, Balenciaga, Gap, the multi-billion-dollar partnerships, the very foundations of his financial independence, evaporated in a matter of days. The press releases were masterclasses in corporate coldness. They spoke of mutual agreements to end partnerships. They condemned his unacceptable, hateful speech. The machine wasn't just discrediting him anymore. It was dismantling his economy. The scent of burnt bridges was no longer metaphorical. It was the smell of shredded contracts and canceled wire transfers. He was being deplatformed on a scale never before seen. His bank accounts, it was reported, were frozen. His access to the levers of capital severed. It was a financial excommunication. For a man who had preached self-reliance, who had built Yeezy as a monument to his own independence, this was the ultimate defeat. They hadn't just taken his reputation, they had taken his treasury. And in the eerie quiet that followed the storm, a new, more disturbing question began to form. Was this simply the consequence of his own actions? Or was it a coordinated takedown? The evidence, when pieced together by his supporters, paints a chilling picture. The timing was too perfect, the corporate unity too swift, the financial repercussions too absolute. It felt less like a series of independent business decisions and more like a script being followed. This is the heart of the conspiracy. The theory that Kanye West's breakdown was not the cause of his downfall, but the intended result of a deliberate, multifaceted campaign. A campaign of control. The logic is cold and brutal. An artist of his stature, wealth, and influence is a threat. He cannot be easily silenced. He cannot be bought. So, you must break him. You push him through relentless pressure, through manufactured controversies, through the weaponization of his own mental health, until he cracks. You guide him, subtly, towards the cliffs of social and financial ruin. You make his destruction look like his own doing. His rants about being a robot take on a new, horrifying meaning. What if he wasn't the programmer losing control, but the program itself being debugged? A piece of complex, beautiful, but malfunctioning code that the system administrators had decided to quarantine and delete? The fallout was a ghost. The man who once commanded the world's attention became a specter, glimpsed in grainy paparazzi photos, his face a mask of exhaustion. The vibrant, creative force that gave the world my beautiful, dark, twisted fantasy was replaced by a hollowed-out figure, surrounded by yes-men and opportunists in isolated compounds. The sound of genius had been replaced by the deafening silence of exile. His children became a central point of the narrative. The heart-wrenching image of a father separated from his family, not by court order, but by the chasm his own behavior had wrought. The industry whispers said it was a tragedy, a preventable tragedy, if only he had taken his medication, if only he had listened to his handlers. But the conspiracy whispers something else. It whispers that a stable, medicated, compliant Kanye West is exactly what the machine wanted all along. A manageable genius, a profitable asset. The breakdown, the rebellion, the truth-telling, that was the malfunction. And the system is designed to correct malfunctions. The story of Kanye West is no longer just a story of music and madness. It has become a modern-day parable about power. It forces us to ask a deeply uncomfortable question about the nature of our world. Where is the line between consequence and conspiracy? When a man stands against the most powerful institutions on earth and is systematically dismantled, is he a martyr for free speech and artistic freedom? Or is he simply a troubled man who finally flew too close to the sun, burning himself on the heat of his own incendiary words? The official record is clear: a brilliant artist destroyed by his own demons. But the hidden truth, the one that lingers in the static of his deleted tweets and the ashes of his dead partnerships, tells a different story. A story not of a breakdown, but of a takedown. The ghost of Kanye West is not silent. He haunts the edges of the culture he once dominated. In late 2023, he resurfaces in Italy, trailed by his new wife. The paparazzi shots are jarring. He is a man stripped of his context. The once iconic look is gone, replaced by a full-face mask, a literal shrouding of his identity. The sound is no longer his music, but the frantic shutters of cameras capturing a spectacle they no longer understand. He's trying to speak, but the channels are gone. The megaphone he spent 2 decades building has been snatched away. He releases music directly to his followers, raw and unpolished. The albums feel like transmissions from a lost satellite, the signal fading in and out. They are dissected not for their artistic merit, but for clues to his mental state. Every line is a potential cry for help or a coded message. The machine has successfully pathologized his art. This is the final stage of control, not just to silence, but but to redefine, to ensure that his legacy is not one of rebellion, but of illness, that his warnings are remembered as symptoms. But the questions he raised will not dissolve so easily. They hang in the air, a toxic mist over the entire entertainment industry. Look at the landscape he left behind. The consolidation of record labels. The algorithms that dictate what music you hear. The quiet, brutal wars over masters that continue to be waged in courtrooms, far from the public eye. Kanye screamed about these things from the rooftops while he was still on them. Now, other artists whisper about them in green rooms, glancing over their shoulders. His story becomes a cautionary tale, told in two entirely different ways. The first version, the official history, is a lesson in personal responsibility. It teaches that talent is not enough, that you must be manageable, that you must play the game, that there are lines you cannot cross, and the most dangerous line of all is the one that separates you from the corporate partners who sign the checks. In this version, Kanye is Icarus. His downfall was his own hubris. The second version, the hidden history, is a lesson in systemic power. It teaches that the machine tolerates genius only when it is profitable and compliant. That when an artist becomes too powerful, too independent, too willing to expose the wiring, the system has protocols for neutralization. It will use your own psychology against you. It will use the media to reframe your rebellion as madness. It will use corporate power to bankrupt you. And it will use your personal life as the hammer for the final nail. In this version, Kanye is a canary in a coal mine. His collapse was a warning of a toxic environment. So which is it? A conspiracy of control or a perfect storm of personal tragedy? The evidence for the former is circumstantial, yet pervasive. The eerie coordination of his financial destruction. The relentless, unified media narrative. The weaponization of his mental health, using his most vulnerable moments as proof of his unreliability. It fits the pattern of how other dissident voices in various fields have been systematically marginalized. The evidence for the latter is human and tragically simple. A man with a known and severe mental health condition, compounded by unimaginable grief and pressure, who spiraled out of control and sabotaged his own empire. It is a story as old as fame itself. Perhaps the most terrifying possibility is that both are true. That the system doesn't need a shadowy committee in a smoke-filled room to enact a conspiracy. It only needs the system itself. The gears of corporate interest, media sensationalism, and public outrage are perfectly designed to grind down a disruptive force. It is a conspiracy not of plotters, but of structure. It is a machine that operates on its own cold, logical imperative: maintain stability. Eliminate threats. Kanye West presented himself as a god. The system reminded him, and everyone watching, that it has the power to dethrone any god it creates. He is now the ghost in the machine, a flicker of corrupted data in the system that deleted him. His every attempt to re-enter the world is monitored, analyzed, and often mocked. The man who wanted to shape the future is now trapped in a feedback loop of his own past. The final image is not of him, but of us, the audience, staring at our screens, consuming the spectacle of his destruction. We clicked, we watched, we judged. We were the oxygen for the very fire that consumed him. The story of Kanye West is not over. It lingers, an open wound on the face of popular culture. It asks us what we are willing to accept as truth. It asks us who we choose to believe. The man screaming about the prison, or the architect who assures us the walls are for his own protection. The machine is quiet now. The asset has been stabilized. The disruptive code has been quarantined. But deep in its core, a single corrupted file remains. A file that contains a desperate, broken, and terrifyingly persistent question.